They laughed at us when the Xyloth Armada descended on Earth, their ships blotting out the sun like a swarm of obsidian locusts. We threw everything at them: satellites, drones, missiles, jets. None of it mattered. They hacked our systems like a child cracking open a simple puzzle box. Our most advanced technology folded like wet cardboard. And still they laughed. I remember their broadcast. The voice translator garbled and metallic, but the contempt came through crystal clear. Your weapons are relics. Your spirit is primitive. We will leave no survivors. That's when we stopped trying to win and started thinking like humans again. It was Donovan, an old bastard retired Coast Guard, who had the idea. Not the generals huddled in bunkers pushing useless buttons. Not the UN tacticians running simulations that all ended the same way: annihilation. No, Donovan was on a fishing pier in Boston when the first ship fell from the sky. And instead of running, he drove straight to the Charlestown Navy Yard. Back then, I was just a restoration mechanic working on old junk. Ships that hadn't seen war since World War II, Korea, Vietnam. Tourists would visit and take selfies with them, laughing about how tiny they looked next to modern destroyers. Kids would press sticky hands against brass railings, asking if they were ever used in a real war. Yeah, they were. Donovan found me in the engine room of the USS Constitution, old Ironsides herself. I was doing preservation work on her timbers, keeping her alive for the next generation of schoolchildren to gawk at. You, he said, pointing a calloused finger. You know this ship? I blinked, wiping grease from my forehead. Better than most. He tossed me a backpack. Inside, a pistol, dried rations, a hand-drawn map, and a navy patch with an eagle clutching a lightning bolt. Congratulations. You're drafted. The first time I saw a Xyloth destroyer up close, my knees nearly buckled. It was beautiful and horrifying, like someone had taken a shard of volcanic glass and built a skyscraper out of it. It moved like it was alive, bending physics in ways no human engineer ever dreamed possible. They'd taken out half our navy in 2 days. Their plasma weapons burned through steel like it was tissue paper. They didn't need to dodge. They simply disintegrated threats before they got close. But their arrogance, that was our edge. See, the Xyloth had one fatal flaw. They believed warfare evolved in a straight line. Technology gets better and better until it becomes unstoppable. What they didn't understand was that humans are at our most dangerous when we have nothing left to lose. Donovan called it the museum strategy. He'd say, they think we're obsolete. Let's show them what obsolete can do. The Constitution wasn't alone. In dry docks and rusting berths across the country, old warships groaned back to life. No firewalls to hack. No AI to hijack. Just brute steel, analog targeting systems, and angry men and women with nothing left but fury. We gutted museums. We pulled spare shells from display cases. We rewired analog radios and used Morse code to communicate. No signals for them to jam. No satellites for them to track. And the best part? They never saw us coming. The first kill came off the coast of Portland. One of their drop ships was hovering near the waterfront, scanning for survivors. We towed the USS Cassin, a destroyer from 1943, out of her berth using tugboats, positioned her behind a wrecked container ship, and manually cranked her turrets to face the sky. 5 shells. 2 misses. 2 hits. 1 vaporized alien transport. The 5th shell ruptured its core and sent flaming debris crashing into their own reinforcement ships. Donovan called it targeted barbarism. I called it survival. We intercepted their chatter that night. Translated roughly to, these primitive apes are firing museum pieces. Why are they working? Because you arrogant bastards, I thought. They were built to work. Built in an era where mistakes meant death. No reliance on perfect systems. Just raw firepower, grit, and the kind of stubborn insanity only humans possess. And now, they weren't laughing. Not after what we did in Boston Harbor. Not after the old museum ships lit up the sky and sent the pride of the Xyloth Armada crashing into the Atlantic like dying gods. Not after we turned their invasion into a war. We didn't have air superiority. We didn't have precision strikes or satellite imaging. Hell, we barely had enough food to keep going. But what we did have was something the Xyloth never calculated for. Anger. Pure, undiluted human rage. The kind that builds when your home's a crater and your brother's lungs are full of ash. The kind that doesn't need orders from brass or strategy briefings. It just needs a direction. And we pointed it at the sky. After Portland, word spread fast. Not through official channels. Those were long dead. But on ham radios, in handwritten notes passed through resistance cells, in the whispers of scavengers and survivors, the museum ships are fighting back. By the time we pulled the Constitution out of Boston Harbor, 3 other historic vessels had joined us. The USS Massachusetts, Big Mamie, dragged from her berth in Fall River by a flotilla of fishing boats. The USS Salem, a heavy cruiser from the 1940s, coaxed back to life by retired engineers who'd worked on her decades ago. And most surprisingly, the USS Nautilus, the world's first nuclear submarine, now a museum in Groton, her reactor somehow restarted by a team of elderly submariners who remembered her secrets. I can still hear the sounds. Screeching metal. The groan of chains pulling steel too old to move. Men and women yelling over grinding engines. It didn't matter if they leaked or if their radar barely worked. We didn't need pretty. We needed floating artillery. And for once, those old girls looked mean again. We didn't bother asking permission. The government was in shambles, huddled somewhere in bunkers, hiding behind titles that meant nothing anymore. President. General. Nobody was listening. Not down here in the grit. Down here, it was names like Donovan that carried weight. He wasn't giving speeches. He wasn't making promises. He was just standing on the Constitution's deck with a battered pipe between his teeth and pointing at the enemy like he could will their ships to burn. Don't aim for glory, he told us. Aim for blood. New York Harbor was a graveyard. Wrecked freighters, half-sunk Coast Guard cutters, civilian boats burned to cinders. The sky was filled with smoke, and the air stank of rotting plastic and scorched metal. The Xyloth had turned Manhattan into a base. Their ships hovered like silent giants, leaking tendrils of sickly green light as they processed the planet's atmosphere for their own use. They didn't bother hiding. Why would they? They thought we were done. So we made damn sure they saw us coming. 4 museum ships. 80 volunteer crew across all of them. Most weren't Navy. Some were old sailors who hadn't touched a ship in decades. Some were teenagers who barely knew port from starboard. But they listened. They learned. And they fought. We hid behind cargo wreckage, killed our lights, cut engines until we drifted in silence, letting the tide do the work. Analog, all the way. No signals. No pings. We were ghosts. Then, at exactly 4:17 a.m., Donovan lit the first shot. The Constitution's guns weren't modern. Hell, she was a sailing frigate, not a battleship. But we'd stripped her decks, mounted salvaged deck guns from decommissioned destroyers, and packed her hull with enough explosives to make a point. The roar that echoed across the harbor wasn't just cannon fire. It was a declaration. The shells streaked upward, trailing smoke, and slammed into the belly of their command ship. The explosion cracked the sky. Fire rained down in streaks like bleeding stars. And suddenly, those primitive relics were a threat. The Xyloth panicked. They turned their attention to us, opened fire with plasma cannons that burned hot enough to melt steel. But their weapons weren't precise, not against targets this close to the city, this interwoven with debris and civilian wreckage. They were used to fighting clean battles in open space. We were fighting dirty in our own backyard. I was below deck on the Constitution when we took our first direct hit. The blast tore through the stern, knocking me clear across the engine room. Hot metal sliced across my side. Blood poured into my boot. Didn't care. Didn't stop. I crawled back to the auxiliary controls and rewired the damaged steering lines with one shaking hand while the other held my ribs together. That's war. Not the speeches. Not the medals. Just pain and motion. By sunrise, the harbor was boiling with debris. The Massachusetts took 3 direct hits but kept firing. The Salem's forward turret was blown clean off, but her aft guns never stopped. Even the Nautilus, surfaced and vulnerable, had launched 2 torpedoes that crippled a Xyloth supply tender before diving deep to evade retaliation. And then came the moment I'll never forget. One of their command ships, the same type that had orchestrated the fall of our modern navy, tried to retreat. That's when Donovan gave the order we'd been waiting for. All batteries. Fire everything. For ships. Every remaining shell. Every torpedo. Every ounce of fury we had left. The volleys streaked across the harbor like the wrath of centuries. Most missed. Some struck the ship's shields and dissolved into harmless light. But enough hit. Enough punched through. The command ship listed, its green glow flickering wildly. Then its engines failed. Then it fell. That beautiful alien monstrosity crashed into the East River like it had been slapped by God himself. The ground shook for miles. Every Xyloth ship left in the area scattered, retreating to higher orbit.
We didn't win the war that day.
But we made them bleed. And once you make something bleed, it learns fear. Donovan found me on deck afterward, leaning against a cannon, watching the smoke rise. His pipe was gone, knocked away by debris, but he had a cigarette cupped in his weathered hand. "Not bad for museum pieces," he said. "Not bad at all." I coughed, tasting blood and ash. "What now?" He stared at the sky where the Xyloth had vanished. "Now they get mean." He was right. Retaliation came 3 nights later.
Silent. Precise.
Brutal. The Massachusetts was still anchored off Staten Island, patching her hull with scrap metal and prayers, when the orbital strike hit. No warning. No alarm. 1 second she was floating like a wounded beast. The next, she was gone, split down the middle, fire boiling out from inside her steel belly. Bodies lit the water like candles. We tried to mount a rescue. There was nothing left to save. Donovan watched from the Constitution's deck, jaw locked so tight I thought he'd crack teeth. "They're learning," he muttered. "That makes them more dangerous." He was right about that, too. The Xyloth stopped mocking us. Stopped broadcasting insults. They were quiet now, focused, methodical. They treated us like a legitimate threat. And when that happened, their tactics changed. They started using scouts to track our movements. Started hitting our supply lines. Started targeting human morale directly. 2 nights after the Massachusetts went down, they dropped sonic devices on Philadelphia. Not to kill, just to deafen.
To disorient.
People clawed at their ears until they bled. Some went mad. Others jumped from buildings to make the noise stop. The message was clear. If you fight, you suffer. I remember standing on the Constitution's deck with Donovan as we picked up faint transmissions, screams, static, then nothing. He looked at me and said, "They're not just trying to beat us. They're trying to break us." For a minute, I almost thought it was working. The crew was stretched thin. We lost people daily, if not to enemy fire, then to fatigue, infection, starvation. We patched wounds with duct tape and drank rainwater filtered through torn shirts. Morale dipped hard after Philadelphia. Some of the younger volunteers stopped talking entirely. A few stared at the sky, like they were waiting to die. Then we got the crate. It was dropped by a civilian helicopter, out of nowhere. No markings. No call signs. Just an old Huey flying low and fast through the smoke. They tossed the container onto our deck and peeled off before we could wave them down. Inside were shells. Not just any shells. These were stamped with military ordnance codes, freshly manufactured, polished like they were built yesterday. A handwritten note sat on top. From the ones who remember. Keep fighting. Someone somewhere still believed in us. Donovan held up one of the shells and grinned like a madman. "You see this? That's a message, kid. We ain't done yet." We pushed harder after that. Raided abandoned armories. Found fuel in rusted tankers left for dead on forgotten highways. Converted school buses into supply haulers. Stripped copper from collapsed bridges to rewire our systems. It was ugly. It was slow. But it worked. We rearmed the Salem. Brought the Texas up from her berth in Houston. Towed her across the Gulf with tugboats and stubbornness. The Texas still listed like a drunk giant, and her radar was useless. But her guns worked. That's all we needed. Donovan started calling us the Wreckborn Fleet. A collection of broken ships and furious people who'd lost everything but weren't done swinging. And somewhere in the black sky above, the Xyloth watched. Maybe they thought we'd burn ourselves out. Maybe they expected us to collapse under the weight of our own desperation. They forgot the most human truth of all. You can't conquer what refuses to die. The crate of fresh shells changed something in us. Not just the ammunition, the knowledge that someone out there still believed, still fought, still remembered. But it also changed something in the Xyloth. They'd been content to treat us like pests, swatting at us from orbit, waiting for us to starve or surrender. After Philadelphia, after the Massachusetts, after we kept coming, they realized we weren't going to do either. So they escalated. It started with the harvesting ships. Massive, bloated vessels that descended on coastal cities not to destroy, but to drain. They lowered organic tentacles, if you could call them that, into the ruins and pulled something invisible from the air, from the water, from the people. Survivors reported feeling weak, hollowed out, like their very will to live was being siphoned away. Donovan gathered us on the Constitution's deck. He looked older now, the weight of command carving deeper lines into his face. They're not just conquerors, he said. They're farmers. And we're the crop. We didn't have a plan. Not yet. But we had eyes everywhere, fishermen, resistance cells, rogue military units who'd abandoned the broken chain of command. They sent us reports, coordinates, patterns. The harvesting ships operated on a schedule, moving from city to city, stripping something vital before moving on. And they were getting bolder, coming lower, staying longer. One of them settled over Baltimore for 3 days straight. By the time it left, the city was silent. Not dead, just empty. People wandered the streets with blank eyes, unable to speak, unable to fight, barely able to breathe. We knew we had to stop them. But how? The Constitution's guns couldn't reach orbit. The Texas and Salem were surface vessels. Even the Nautilus, with her torpedoes, couldn't touch a ship that never came within 50 miles of the water. Then we got a second crate. This one wasn't dropped by helicopter. It came by submarine, a rusty diesel-electric boat from some forgotten navy that had surfaced off the coast and signaled us with an ancient lamp. The crew was a mix of old sailors and young refugees, and they carried something we'd never expected. Missiles. Not just any missiles. Cold War relics, decommissioned decades ago, pulled from a silent silo in the Dakota Badlands by people who remembered where the old weapons were buried. Nuclear warheads. Donovan stared at them for a long time. We all did. If we use these, I said slowly, we're not just fighting an invasion. We're declaring something else entirely. He nodded. We're declaring that extinction goes both ways. The plan was insane. We'd tow the warheads to strategic positions, lure a harvesting ship low enough, and launch everything we had. But we needed bait. Something the Xyloth couldn't ignore. Donovan looked at the Constitution. At old Ironsides herself. She's the most famous ship in American history, he said quietly. They'll know what she represents. They'll want the symbolism of destroying her. You're volunteering our flagship as bait? I'm volunteering myself. He lit his last cigarette. You'll command from the Salem. If this works, you lead whatever comes next. I started to argue. He cut me off. I was dead the day they burned Boston. Everything since has been borrowed time. He smiled, that mad grin I'd come to know. Let me spend it well. 3 days later, the Constitution sailed alone into New York Harbor under full sail, canvas restored for museum storage, masts gleaming in the pale sun. She was a ghost from another century, beautiful and defiant, daring the Xyloth to look. They took the bait. A harvesting ship descended, massive and pulsing, its organic hull gleaming with sickly light. It hovered directly over the Constitution, close enough that Donovan could probably see the individual pores in its flesh. That's when we launched. The missiles came from everywhere, from the Nautilus surfaced in the Hudson, from the Texas hidden behind Liberty Island, from the Salem anchored in the Narrows. 8 warheads, ancient and terrible, streaking toward the beast. Their point defense activated. Plasma beams lanced out, destroying 4 missiles instantly. 2 more detonated early, Harmless fireworks in the sky. But two got through. The warheads struck the harvesting ship's underbelly and detonated together. The blast was visible from orbit, a second sun born in the heart of New York Harbor. The shockwave flattened what remained of Lower Manhattan and sent a tidal wave crashing through the streets. When the light faded, the harvesting ship was falling.
Dead.
Broken. Crashing into the bay. And the Constitution was gone. We found Donovan's pipe 3 days later, washed up on a beach in Brooklyn. No body.
No letter this time.
Just that battered piece of metal, carried by the tide. I kept it. Still have it. That night, as we regrouped on the Salem, a transmission crackled through. Not Xyloth. Human. This is Unified Earth Command. We've been monitoring your activities. It's time we talked. Unified Earth Command. The same bastards who'd gone silent when the invasion started. The same leaders who'd hidden in bunkers while we bled. The war wasn't over. It was about to get complicated. The transmission from Unified Earth Command hung in the air like a threat. On the Salem's bridge, my crew looked at me with hollow eyes, eyes that had seen too much, lost too much. Response, the comms officer asked. I stared at the pipe in my hand. Donovan's pipe. Let them wait. We had work to do. The harvesting ship's wreckage had settled in the shallows off Brooklyn, and salvage teams were already picking through it. Among the twisted organic metal, they'd found something unexpected. Prisoners. Dozens of them, still alive, suspended in translucent pods filled with viscous fluid. Their eyes were open, blinking, aware, but unable to move, unable to speak. We cut them out one by one. Most were soldiers who'd been captured in the early days of the invasion. Some had been missing for months. A few had been modified, strange patterns etched into their skin, faint bioluminescence in their veins. The Xyloth hadn't just been harvesting us. They'd been studying us. Experimenting. One of the rescued soldiers grabbed my arm as we carried him to the medical bay. His eyes were wild, urgent. They're not just invaders, he rasped. They're builders. They're making something. Something big. Making what? But he was already unconscious, his body shutting down from whatever cocktail of alien chemicals still swam in his blood. The next transmission from UEC came 12 hours later. Less patient this time. Wreckborn Fleet, this is your final warning. Respond immediately or be designated hostile. I finally answered.
Just voice, no video.
Hostile to who? We've been fighting an invasion while you hid in holes. A long pause. Then a new voice, calmer, older, carrying the weight of authority. This is General Marcus Webb. I understand your anger. I understand your loss. I was in that bunker, and I carry the shame of it every day. Another pause. But we have intelligence you need. About what the Xyloth are really doing here. About what's coming. I looked around the bridge. My people, what remained of them, watched me with exhausted, suspicious eyes. What's coming? I asked. The harvesting ships aren't just collecting resources. They're collecting genetic material. Human DNA. Thousands of samples, shipped off-world every week. Webb's voice dropped. We've intercepted communications. They're not trying to conquer Earth. They're trying to replace it. They're building a hybrid army. Half Xyloth, half human. Something that can survive here permanently. The bridge went silent. I thought of the children we'd found in that spire, strapped to chairs, wires running through their veins, being changed. The Xyloth weren't just invaders. They were colonizers in the worst possible way. Why tell us now? I demanded. Because our satellites show something incoming. A mothership. Bigger than anything they've sent before. It'll be here in 72 hours. Webb's voice was grim. If it lands, if it deploys what it's carrying, we lose. Not just the war. We lose what it means to be human. I stared at Donovan's pipe, felt its weight, remembered his words. You don't need leaders now. You are the leaders. Send us your intelligence, I said. Every coordinate, every weakness, every scrap you have. Then stay out of our way. Wreckborn Fleet. Donovan's dead. I'm not looking for a new commander. I cut the transmission. 72 hours.
3 days to prepare for the end.
We worked around the clock. The Nautilus mapped undersea approaches. The Texas and Salem positioned themselves at key points along the coast. Fishermen and refugees converted their boats into missile platforms. Retired engineers resurrected coastal defense batteries from World War II, massive guns that hadn't fired in 80 years, now aimed at the sky. And from somewhere deep in the American heartland, a convoy arrived carrying the last gift from UEC, a single nuclear warhead, modified for manual deployment. No launch systems. No guidance. Just a bomb and a timer. If we can't stop the mothership, Webb's final message read, someone needs to take it down from inside. I knew who that someone would have to be. The mothership arrived on schedule. It didn't descend. It appeared, ripping through the atmosphere like a wound in reality itself. Twice the size of the harvesting ships. Pulses of sickly light rippling across its hull. And inside, according to our intelligence, thousands of pods. Thousands of humans, captured and modified, waiting to be deployed as something they never chose to become. We opened fire with everything. Coastal batteries roared. Missiles streaked upward. The Nautilus launched her remaining torpedoes at the ship's underside. The Texas and Salem fired until their guns glowed red. And the mothership shrugged it all off. Shields flickered, absorbed, dissipated. Our grand assault barely scratched its hull. I looked at the nuclear warhead sitting on the Salem's deck. Looked at the small boat we'd rigged for a one-way trip. Someone needs to volunteer, I said quietly. Every hand on the bridge went up. I chose the one who'd lost the most. A young woman named Riley, her family taken in the Baltimore harvesting, her brother among the modified we'd found in the Spire. She looked at me with eyes that held no fear, only purpose.
Get me close, she said.
We launched the boat under cover of darkness, using the wreckage of the harvesting ship as camouflage. Riley piloted it alone, a tiny speck against that massive alien horror. We watched on radar as she approached. Watched as she disappeared beneath the mothership's hull. Watched as the signal from her transmitter went silent. For 3 minutes, nothing. Then the sky turned white. The mothership cracked open like an egg, fire and light pouring from every seam. It hung there for one terrible moment, suspended against the stars, and then it fell, breaking apart as it tumbled toward the Atlantic. We found Riley's body 3 days later, washed ashore near the ruins of Coney Island. The warhead had detonated exactly as planned. She was smiling. I still don't know if that was the blast or peace. Maybe both. The Xyloth didn't retreat after the mothership fell. But they faltered. Their coordination broke. Their harvesting stopped. For the first time since they'd arrived, we saw something in their transmissions that hadn't been there before.
Fear.
And that's when we knew. The war wasn't over. But it was finally winnable. We gathered what remained of the wreck-borne fleet. Counted our dead. Tended our wounded. And for the first time in months, we allowed ourselves something dangerous.
Hope.
The mothership's fall broke something in the Xyloth. Not their will to fight. That would take longer.
But their certainty.
Their smug, unshakable conviction that they were superior, unstoppable, inevitable. They started making mistakes. Harvesting ships ventured too low, too far from support. We picked them off one by one. Ambushes from hidden coastal batteries, torpedo strikes from resurrected submarines, even suicide boats packed with explosives ramming into their landing zones. The wreck-borne fleet became a legend, then a nightmare, then a promise of vengeance that haunted every Xyloth transmission we intercepted. 6 months after the mothership fell, we liberated Boston. A year after that, we retook New York. The Xyloth retreated to their remaining strongholds, fortified positions in the Midwest, where they dug in deep, expecting to wait us out. They didn't understand that waiting only made us angrier. That every month they held our soil, every day they kept our people, every hour they continued their grotesque experiments. It just added fuel to a fire that was already consuming them. 2 years after the invasion began, we stood on the deck of the Salem and watched the last Xyloth ship lift off from what remained of Chicago. It wasn't a retreat so much as a rout. They abandoned equipment, supplies, even their own wounded in their haste to escape. We let them go. Not because we were merciful, because we wanted them to carry a message back to whatever empire had sent them. Earth is not a prize. Earth is a trap. The Constitution was gone, but we built a monument to her where she'd fallen in New York Harbor, a simple stone pillar with Donovan's pipe mounted at its center. Every year on the anniversary of the battle, we gather there. We remember.
We mourn.
We tell the stories so they're never forgotten. Riley got her own memorial. A small plaque near the spot where we found her body, overlooking the Atlantic. It reads, "She brought the light." The modified survivors, the ones the Xyloth had changed, experimented on, tried to turn into something else, they became something unexpected. Not hybrids. Not monsters. Something new. They carried traces of Xyloth biology in their cells, faint luminescence in their eyes, strange abilities that emerged slowly over time. Some could sense Xyloth presence from miles away. Others healed faster than should be possible. A few could even interface with the alien technology we'd salvaged, making it respond to human thought. We didn't fear them. They were ours. They'd paid for that transformation with suffering no one should endure. If they emerged from it with gifts, those gifts belonged to humanity now. General Webb, the same man who'd hidden in his bunker, who'd sent us the warhead, who'd carried his shame like a physical weight, came to visit me after the last ship fled. We sat on the Salem's deck, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and red. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly. I thought about Donovan, about Riley, about all the faces I'd seen in those harvesting pods, alive but not living, waiting for someone to remember them. "No," I agreed. "You don't." He nodded, accepting it. "What happens now? To the fleet? To you?" I looked at the ships still anchored in the harbor, the Texas, the Salem, the Nautilus, and a dozen others we'd resurrected from museums and dry docks. They were battered, scarred, held together by hope and welding wire. But they floated. They fought. They won.
"The fleet stays," I said.
"As long as there's a single Xyloth ship in the galaxy, as long as any species thinks about trying what they tried, we stay ready." "And you?" I pulled out Donovan's pipe. Didn't light it, just held it, feeling its weight, remembering the mad old bastard who drafted me into a war I never asked for. "I teach," I said. "Every kid who wants to learn. Every adult who survived. I teach them what happened here. What we did. What it cost. And what it meant." Webb was quiet for a long time. Then he stood, saluted, not formally, just a simple gesture of respect, and walked away. I never saw him again. Years passed. The world rebuilt slowly, painfully, scarred but unbroken. Cities rose from ruins. Families returned to coasts that had once run red. The modified ones found their place among us, not as outcasts but as guardians, living reminders that even the worst horrors can birth something worth protecting. The Wreckborn fleet became a training ground. Every year, new recruits arrived, young men and women who'd grown up on stories of the invasion, who wanted to ensure it never happened again. They learned on the same ships their grandparents had fought on. They learned Morse code and analog targeting and the art of making do with less. They learned that technology fails, but stubbornness endures. And sometimes, late at night, when the stars are clear and the water is calm, I walk the deck of the Salem and listen to the ghosts. Donovan, laughing as he lit that first shot. Riley, silent and determined, piloting her boat toward oblivion. The crew of the Massachusetts, firing until the water took them. All the faces I'd seen in those pods, blinking awake, realizing they were still human after all. They're not gone. They're in the wind, in the waves, in the stubborn refusal of this species to ever quit. I'm old now, older than I ever expected to be. My hands shake, my eyes fail, but my memory holds. And when I tell the story, to new recruits, to curious children, to anyone who'll listen, I always end the same way. They laughed at our museum ships. They called us relics. They thought we were obsolete. I pause, letting the silence stretch. They forgot that relics are just things that refuse to die. That obsolescence is just another word for underestimated. and that humans, real humans, don't fight for glory or territory or resources. We fight because something inside us simply won't let us stop. I hold up Donovan's pipe. It's warm in my hand, even after all these years. So if they come again, and they will, eventually they'll find us waiting. Still floating. Still fighting. Still aiming straight at their goddamn hearts. The stars will overhead. The water laps against the hull. And somewhere, in the deep dark between worlds, I hope the Xyloth are listening. Because we remember. And we're ready.